Caitlyn Clark says goodbye to Carver-Hawkeye Arena, and almost West Virginia says goodbye to Caitlyn Clark's college career in the process. Plus, Princeton, always Princeton. Jenn Hatfield here. Locked on Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Well, hi there and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host, Howard Megdal, and I want to thank you for showing up for us every day the way we show up for you. 6 days a week, past, present, future of women's basketball. And what do you do in return? Over 180,000 of you listening in February alone, and we are shattering that mark here in March. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and do it and subscribe to The Next as well. Over at thenexthoops.com, over 100 reported pieces every month. People fanned out across the country last weekend to cover 11 of the 16 venues. We are in Portland. We are in Albany this weekend. $9 a month, $72 a year. You get every one of our stories sent right to your inbox. Support the work, specifically the work of Jenn Hatfield. Jenn is, how do you even start? She's the managing editor. She is our Washington Mystics beat reporter. She is our Ivy League beat reporter. She is our sibling rivalry reporter as well. And Jenn was in Iowa this past weekend for the final games of Caitlyn Clark's home career. The great Angie Holmes also there, did a terrific story about it. Jenn, just for you as somebody who has been in all manners of women's basketball arenas, sometimes with 100 people in the stands, sometimes with a sellout like we saw this past weekend, what did it mean in your eyes to see what the epicenter of the Caitlyn Clark experience was like?
Yeah, it was really powerful for me. It was my first time in Carver-Hawkeye. I've seen Caitlyn Clark play live a couple times, including last year's Final Four, but I hadn't seen her in her home arena and seen how those fans reacted to her. You know, you always hear about how great Carver-Hawkeye is, how devoted the Iowa fans are, but seeing it and hearing it and feeling it are very different. You know, it really struck me. To get from the media room down to my seat, I had to walk around the top of the concourse and then down to my seat, and just walking down into the arena toward the court level, seeing the fans, you know, this is well before tip off still, but they're there, they're excited. Just kind of seeing that gave me some goosebumps. And it was really, it was a little emotional for me seeing how much these people care about women's sports, because as you know all too well, that's not the case everywhere.
The growth is enormous, and it's interesting. I do want to make this point. I hope people understand this, because I've heard some newcomers to the space say, Caitlyn Clark has made Iowa basketball matter to Iowa. And Iowa basketball has mattered to Iowa. Iowa women's basketball has mattered to Iowa for a century. But this is going back to the 6-on-6 games dating back to 1921 that have always been epic events in the state, and obviously fighting the same fights that we've seen women's sports have to fight other places. But my goodness, it almost feels less like Caitlyn Clark is someone who put Iowa basketball on the map and more like a reward and a natural outgrowth for it. Does it feel that? Do you feel not just that moment when you're there inside that arena, but the tradition as well?
Yeah, definitely. And Caitlyn kind of alluded to this too in her post-game press conference, talking about, you know, those who had been there before, you know, Megan Gustafson in particular, and how it's not just her waking up a fan base, right? You don't get that kind of crowd and that feeling for new. It has to be this established thing where fans are used to coming and they know the history and they're involved and they're screaming and they're cheering for not just this year or the past 4 years, but for decades. So it definitely felt like a long time thing. And it was, like I said, it was just really meaningful to see it play out in person, and in particular to see how those fans do react to Caitlyn in particular.
What else can you tell us about how 14,000 fans react to a tied game with under 3 minutes to go? Iowa, for all its strength, for all its incredible season here, it's worth remembering there was a previous experience for this fan base just a couple of years ago, losing to Creighton in the second round on its home floor. And despite the fact that so much of the hype around the NCAA tournament is focused on one player, West Virginia came very close to pulling off the upset. We'll get more into West Virginia in segment 2, because that is a Mountaineers team and program that deserves its turn in the spotlight. But what did it sound like?
Yeah, I think there was definitely some nervousness. There was awareness of the past. I don't think Iowa fans were super comfortable heading into the final few minutes. But, what it sounded like, in the first minute of the game against Holy Cross, there was a normal whistle, and the fan in front of me went ballistic. They were locked in from the tip of the first game that Iowa played. Anytime Caitlyn Clark hit one of her logo threes, the place went nuts. Anytime Caitlyn Clark put her hands up and asked for the fans to get loud, they did. I mean, they almost shook the place when she asked them to. So they were really it felt like they were sitting on the edge of their seats, really wanting to, will this Iowa team forward. And then there was kind of a relief when it happened, when they beat West Virginia, and there was a small, on-court celebration, and the fans stayed for that. And there seemed to be kind of a collective exhale and celebration among them as well.
I'm struck by the fact that essentially Iowa had to win this game down the stretch with its defense. And just to give listeners a little bit of context, freshman year, Caitlyn Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes were among the very worst defensive teams in all of Division I. If memory serves, they were 338th in opposing points per possession out of 349. We had Lisa Bluter here on the program talking about it. And basically what she said was, we had an A offense and an F defense. We need to get to a C defense in order to be a contender. That's effectively where they've been since. They've been around middle of the pack nationally defensively. They are once again tops in the country in offensive points per possession. But down the stretch, in order to win a national title, in order to make that final step, they're obviously going to need to get key stops at key moments. And you could argue it was a failure to do that in the national championship game. If you give up 102 points to LSU, you are not going to win a national title. So from that perspective, seeing what they did defensively, how significant do you think that is in adding that knowledge to the way Iowa can play?
I think it's huge. I think it's more valuable than if they'd beaten the brakes off West Virginia offensively. To not only to win that way, but to know that they can win that way, I think is definitely a confidence booster. And Lisa Bluter talked about it in her opening statement after the win, how proud she was that they found a new way to win. And in particular, praised Gabby Marshall for her defense on the perimeter. But really, it was a team effort, and she was also beaming with pride about how they handled West Virginia's defense and took care of the ball, which set them up so they didn't have to play too much transition defense against West Virginia, and they could just lock into half-court defense. But yeah, their defense was really good.
There's a scene in Angie Holmes' story about this, and I highly recommend it. Go to thenexthoops.com and check it out. But the announcer over the loudspeaker, how about the defensive effort of Gabby Marshall? And you can go to the box score and say, wow, Gabby Marshall really didn't do much. She scored 0 points. She did not make a field goal, right? But a steal, a block, grabbed a key rebound. There was a reason she was out there for 36 minutes and 2 seconds. For her to end her home career this way and be shouted out in this way, it just spoke to me as a fan base that would understand the intricacies, not just the Caitlyn Clark 35-footer, which is something that we could all understand. So, seeing Gabby do that feels like it mattered in a way that's going to come back as well, to your point, not just an issue of the team overall. But I'm glad you made that point. We have a lot more to get to. Segment 2, we're going to be talking more about West Virginia, a program that's been through a lot, but is clearly not the worse for wear for it. So back talking a lot more March Madness with Jenn Hatfield after this. But first, I want to talk to you guys about Nissan. And Nissan in 2024 offers a lot of different options for you. So there's the Nissan Rogue. What I like about the Nissan Rogue is its versatility, right? You can drive in the city, you can take it on the road, and anytime you do it, look, I get lost all the time, left to my own devices. So what do they have? Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store. It's all built right in on the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. So you can use the Nissan Rogue, get to where you need to go, but it's not the only opportunity. Let's say you have a bigger family. 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room up to 8. Let's say you need to tow even more cargo. Well, up to 6,000 pounds towing capacity, and you're not going to hear it falter along the way either. 284 horsepower, get you where you need to go when you need to get there. And you could go even bigger. The 2024 Nissan Armada, rugged 4x4 drive, up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Any of these are potentially great options. You go to your local Nissan dealership, give them a test drive, and go on your next big adventure, or just check it out right now at nissanusa.com. Locked On Women's Basketball also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. So what is Fire TV? It's everything. It's everything. It's live game, it's sports, highlights, in-depth analysis. How do you get it? Well, my favorite thing is there's this Fire TV stick. You just grab it, you pop it into your HDMI out input right in the back of your TV. That's easy enough. My parents are able to do it. It's very, very simple. Plug and play. And now there are even Fire TV specific channels, not to be missed. Locked On has a Fire TV channel. Most of the big pro leagues, college conferences, all available to you, along with streaming television shows, movies as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and even Alexa devices. If you haven't checked them out yet, you should. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. Back here with the great national writer, Jenn Hatfield, and we are talking about West Virginia, the Mountaineers. Man, this is not a season I think a lot of people saw coming. You lose your coach, Dawn Plitzewhite goes to University of Minnesota. You have to start over in a lot of ways, although when you got J.J. Quinterly on your team, that certainly helps a lot. An elite two-way star guard. Ultimately, 25-8, fourth in the nation in defensive points per possession. What was your impression, just top line, out of West Virginia and what you were able to see there?
Yeah, I was really impressed with them. It seems like they have become a really cohesive unit, especially on the defensive end. Really hard for teams to prepare for that if you haven't been pressed in the regular season or have only been pressed occasionally. Seems like they all came together really well. Quinterly and Jordan Harrison, a guard that head coach Mark Kellogg brought over from Stephen F. Austin. Those two are both small but fit really well together in the backcourt, which was kind of a question mark whether you could get away with playing two small guards in the Big 12. But those two wreak havoc on both ends, scoring and stealing, and they're just really fun to watch. They've got a lot of room to grow. This is West Virginia's third head coach in 3 years because Plitzewhite only stayed for a year. So they've had a lot of change, but they seem to be building something, and it was definitely exciting to watch them in person.
You know, it's what Mark Kellogg is doing is what he's done everywhere, And he did it at Stephen F. Austin, and that team was dominant in the Southland and then in the Western Athletic Conference as well. He did it in D2 as well. He's just won everywhere he's gone. Does it feel like not only was this a solid season, but West Virginia potentially has its long-term coach? And again, that goes back to, with Mike Carey leaving and then Dawn heading to Minnesota. Obviously, the Mountaineers have needed that kind of stability.
You definitely hope so for them. It seems like a good fit all around. And like I said, he seems to be really building something. It helps that he kind of pushed together the styles of Carey and Plitzowite, so the returning players had something to build on. It's not like he brought in like the completely polar opposite system that they had to learn. So he kind of tried to build on what had been as much as he could, and it happened to match his own style. So I think he's really starting to build something, and then now it's a matter of getting recruiting going and tapping the transfer portal and all those things that coaches have to do to generate momentum after year one.
Quinterly, again, another top 100 finish in steal percentage, 4.6%. You're seeing her make more and more of her shots, was north of 34% from three. Free throws near 80%, suggesting there's even room to grow beyond the arc for her as well. How close to pro ready is she as she heads into her senior year next year?
Yeah, I mean, she's an All-American. She's definitely got an intriguing skill set. Some folks might look at her size and ask questions, but she's a really impressive player, and like you said, has another year to grow and develop. So I think the sky's the limit for her.
Lauren Fields completed her career, of course, with a fifth year. Was at Oklahoma State, was at Arizona as well. When you look at the way in which this team has come together, do you feel as if West Virginia has an opportunity to be not just a place where players can come and excel in this system, but potentially a destination as well?
Sure, yeah. And Mark Kellogg spoke about this after the Iowa game. He said he hoped that, he was talking about how the transfer portal is already open, how he's trying to recruit, and there's a lot of things to balance this time of year. But he said hopefully the showing against Iowa, some recruits hopefully saw that and said they wanted to play in that system. And I think that system that they play with their multiple full court presses and ability to trap and ball pressure in the half court and, can play all sorts of ways and make you uncomfortable. That is a style that some recruits will definitely gravitate to and makes West Virginia stand out compared to other teams. So I think that could definitely be a selling point.
It is fascinating, right? To force Iowa to play the way you want to play is significant, but also for them to beat Princeton. And we're going to talk a little more about Princeton in segment 3, but that was an elite Princeton team. That was an underseeded, in my view, Princeton team at a 9 seed. But in a lot of ways, it felt like they played Princeton style and beat Princeton at it as well. He talked a lot about winning in multiple ways. Is that probably the most important thing when it comes to an NCAA tournament run, is being able to do that?
I think so. And the thing with the press is, and he said this too, like you think of a press and you think of a team that wants to always speed you up and ram the ball down your throat and play fast. And that's what they do. And sometimes that sort of team can get derailed if the opponent is not bothered by your press, because that's what they do. And that's what they rely on defensively, right? This team doesn't have to play fast. They do want to press you, but sometimes they press you to slow down the game. So the ball moves slower. You take longer to cross half court. Your half court offense is slower. Like they don't necessarily want to speed you up. And against Iowa, they said, we don't want to speed it up. We want to keep it, lower possessions so that Iowa offense has fewer possessions to work with. And so they just pressured the heck out of it in the half court and made Iowa uncomfortable that way. So being able to use their press to accomplish different goals, I think is pretty unique and sets them up well to play different kinds of teams that they may not want to try to run out of the gym.
The other half of this, and I just want to point out this detail, something I particularly enjoy about your work, and I've talked about this, is the level of detail that you find, that you spot. And so it was notable to me that they used hand signals in order to let each other know what they were doing, anticipating the loud crowd at Iowa. And then Lisa Bluter, of course, sees the hand signals essentially like a player on second base being able to read the catcher's signals. She grabbed and was able to tell people what was coming. Despite that, West Virginia still able to stay toe-to-toe with Iowa. Just absolutely fascinating to see. There's a lot more to come on this, and we got to talk about Princeton as well. Princeton out in Iowa saw their season come to an end, but we're going to talk about the Tigers, not just what they've done, but also what is to come next. So we'll be right back in segment 3 with the great Jenn Hatfield. I'm Howard Megdal, and you're listening to Locked On Women's Basketball. Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by BetterHelp. So look, BetterHelp gives you an opportunity to deal with something that you need to get off your chest, but not just anywhere, but with somebody who's able to help you figure it out. You know, you figure out what gets you legitimately upset and why, right? And not in like I'm going to curse at the refs kind of way, but really in a let's just figure out how to find a better way forward to deal with that. Therapy is a way for you to do that. And BetterHelp makes it easier than ever to access therapy. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. And now you have a special offer. BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA will get you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Don't talk to the ref. You didn't get a technical foul. Talk to a therapist at BetterHelp.com. Truly, therapists, they won't tee you up. It's just not in the playbook. So we are back with Jenn Hatfield talking all about the Princeton Tigers. And Carla Berube has built on what Courtney Banghart had previously built at Princeton, nothing less than a juggernaut. We know it in terms of the Ivy League. We know that the Ivy League got 2 bids this year, which made a lot of sense given the relative strength of Princeton and Columbia. Before we just get into the Princeton specifics, how gratifying, Jenn, is it as somebody who's covered the Ivy for quite some time to see the national understanding of the level of play there match up with what we have seen up close and know to be the case for a long time now?
It's been great to see it. I think for a long time, nationally, the Ivy League kind of boiled down to Princeton. You know, that was what people knew about the league, and with good reason. Princeton has been elite for a long time now. But seeing the greater recognition of Columbia, and especially their star guard, Abby Shue, seeing the recognition of how well the Ivy League grad transfers are playing at USC, which is the #1 seed. All those things have really, I think, helped raise the profile of the league and the league as a whole, and not just Princeton, while also Princeton continuing to excel, helps make it clear this is a trend. This is not a flash in the pan of grad transfers. This is a league that people need to pay more attention to. People need to watch more, as was said on the USC broadcast on Monday night. So
USC effectively the 9th member of the Ivy League with all of their players. Jenn had a terrific story about that over at thenexthoops.com. Honestly, just go to Jenn's stories. I can't summarize all that she did. You wrote, 38 stories this month? What did you write? It was a crazy amount of stories. Just go read everything that she does at all times, now and forever. And I say it, though, because the USC Ivy League transfers came from 3 different programs, right? And that speaks to my mind, the depth in this league. You know, we've talked about that Dartmouth is an up-and-coming program. Brown, so close to even making the Ivy League conference tournament, with apologies to Lindsay Gottlieb, so close, but didn't quite get there. And I look at the league in a similar way to how I look at the way women's basketball as a whole was elevated first by Tennessee and UConn. And then there's this standard that everyone is looking to match. Does it feel to you like the Ivy as a whole is looking to match up with what Princeton and Columbia have gotten to as programs at this point?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you can see it in the recent hiring wave of Princeton assistants, former Princeton assistants, to take jobs around the league. That's probably the most obvious place. But even listening to coaches talk, everyone is saying, anything less than championship is not what we want here. And that's kind of that can be a pat line or it can be said with gusto, and it's been the latter around the league.
Princeton didn't win a game in the tournament this year. Again, that 9's tough for that team with the schedule they played, with the kind of wins they put up. I thought that was a little low. It does seem like year by year they're kind of building in terms of how the NCAA is willing to recognize what they're doing. They weren't thrown into a 6-11 game or, given a double-digit seed. But did you think 9 was too low for this team where they were?
Yeah, I think it's a little low, but I think the Ivy League always gets seeded a little bit low for my liking. There was a lot of discussion in Iowa about how West Virginia was also seeded too low. So it's kind of a double whammy for Princeton if you think they're seeded too low and then they get an opponent that is also probably not an 8 seed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's tough all around. I will say, when we talked to the selection committee chair, Lisa Peterson, after the brackets were first released, the way that she talked about Princeton and Columbia really suggested to me a greater respect from the committee for the Ivy League than I've heard from them in the past, which was really gratifying to hear. Hearing her talk about Columbia's loss to Princeton in the Ivy League championship game as more about how good Princeton was than some shortcoming on Columbia's part was really interesting to hear. And then, she talked about how the committee's been impressed with Princeton all year and the schedule they've played and knows how good of a team Princeton is, which is something that you can't always take for granted with a mid-major team looking for fair seating in the bracket.
Princeton has some obvious losses here. I'm sort of two tracks I want to end on with this. The first being there's been a 4-year trend, and I think I know why it's happened, but I'm curious what you think. Their defensive rating at Princeton has gotten worse each of the past 4 years, from 69.9 in 2019, 2020, before COVID, 74.7, 78.7. It was 84.7 this past year. I don't think this is a Princeton team that is struggling with Carla Berube's scheme. I think this is a Princeton team that is both scheduled better externally and within the Ivy League facing more significant competition. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I agree with that. And also just, some of the players they've graduated over the past few years have been hard to replace defensively. Players have had to slide into different roles. So Carla talked about that a lot this year, how the defense was, every time I would talk to her, the defense is a work in progress. We're still working on it. We're getting there. And, that's in part because they had to replace players like Grace Stone and Julia Cunningham, who were super impactful defenders. So I definitely think the schedule plays a huge role, as does the strength of the Ivy League overall. And I think they got better as the season went on defensively, and they were able to gel a little bit more.
Does Princeton have an answer to replace Ellie Mitchell? And, presumably you can pop Chet Nowicki into that starting 5 spot, but I'm just curious. I'm sure you've already started playing with the lineup in your head, significantly greater roles even for some of the freshman performers as well. Just take me through kind of how you see that division of labor.
Yeah, so replacing Ellie and Chet, who's also graduating, that's going to be tough to do in the front court. They've got a host of bigs who could slide in there. I think it's going to be a pretty open battle for who takes those jobs. But the good news is they've got not only depth in the front court returning, but they have like substantial size that holds up on a national scale. Sometimes Ivy League teams come into the tournament and they're just undersized. You could look at Columbia against Vanderbilt, for instance. They were just smaller in a lot of positions. Mm-hmm. Princeton, has 6'3", 6'4" players returning. I would look at Tabia Manze, who started the first game of the year before getting hurt after missing her freshman year due to injury. She's someone who I think has a lot of untapped potential, and if she stays healthy, I wouldn't be surprised to see her start. But it's really going to be an open competition. We'll see if maybe an incoming freshman will come in and make some noise there. And then the guards, I think is a little bit more settled. I think we'll see Ashley Chia come in at point guard for Caitlyn Chen, the former high school teammates turned college teammates. I think that'll be a seamless transition there for as good as Caitlyn Chen is and how much impact she's going to have somewhere else as a grad transfer next year. I think Madison St. Rose will be a junior next year. She's probably going to be the star, heart and soul of that team. And then you've got Sky Belker, who was an Ivy Rookie of the Year candidate this year, coming back for her sophomore year. Great two-way player. I think is going to take a leap as a sophomore, and then you've got some depth off the bench there. So I think the perimeter is not something I'm worried about with them at all. I think they've got a lot of really natural young stars who are fit to slide in there. And then the interior is kind of a question mark, but like in the intriguing way and not the like way.
Very true. And again, I misspoke about whether there would be a Nowacki on the team or not is the larger part with Toby Nowacki, a top 100 recruit, by the way, coming to Princeton. So I dare say between the Ivy League and multiple Nowackis, I think that Princeton's program has never been in a stronger position. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think Carla's got this thing rolling. I think Ellie Mitchell in particular is going to be really hard to replace, just the unique skill set that she brought. I mean, Caitlyn Jenn is a former Ivy League Player of the Year, so she's no slouch to replace either. But Ellie's defense and rebounding, I talked to Ellie's high school coach for a story I did on her rebounding, and he was telling me how after she graduated, well, first after she graduated, he cried. But the year after she graduated, it was really hard for them defensively because they were so used to Ellie kind of cleaning up their mistakes and making them invisible. And then she wasn't there anymore. And they're like, why is our defense like not as good anymore? Mm-hmm. And I think at least in the preseason, Princeton will have some of that. We'll see how quickly they can, figure out ways to plug the Ellie Mitchell sized holes that emerge. But I think there's definitely going to be an adjustment defensively. And I'm curious, how Carla and her defensive genius schemes around that, but definitely something to look for.
If anyone to figure it out, it's Carla Berube and her staff. Well, Jenn Hatfield, delighted to chat with you. As always, again, to everyone listening, make sure you are following everything Jenn does. And I know that's a full-time job just to do it, but I recommend wholeheartedly everything Jenn does. Appreciate you. We will be back with you tomorrow, getting you ready for the weekend's games even further. Until then, I am Howard Megdal, wishing all of you a wonderful Thursday.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.